Next up, we have Paladin. Our first card in Paladin is Argent Braggart, a 2-cost minion with Battle Cry, gain attack and health to match the highest in the battlefield. So this is very similar to like a Faceless Manipulator, but only for stats. So, say there is a 5/5 in play, you get a 2-cost 5/5. Say there's a 10/10 in play, you get a 2-cost 10/10. So this, I think, is it's kind of a weird card. It's something that in like a buff deck has the potential to be pretty strong to use with your own minions. In a metagame where there's a lot of large opposing minions, it could be reasonably effective there. It is worth noting that like it's kind of a if you're playing it in like a buff deck, it's kind of a like going even further all in on something. It feels like it is likely to be good potentially in like a Libram deck, where obviously you don't actually get the Librams on this guy, but if you have buffs that are essentially reusable, you like Libram up a guy to be really big, and then you can Braggart it. So now your opponent, even if they kill the guy with the Libram on it, they have to deal with the Braggart as well, and then you get the Librams back and can use them to buff a future Braggart. I'm actually a little curious because this says gain attack and health to match the highest in the battlefield. So does it gain attack to be equal to the highest attack and then health to equal to the highest health? So it's not necessarily like an individual big thing, right? Like if your opponent has, or let's say like you have a, I don't know, Core Hound and your opponent has an Amet. Well, I believe this will be a 9/7, right? So it'll gain the highest attack and then highest health. So it's not necessarily, like just copy an individual big guy. But that's, what wrapping your head around is like, if there's going to be like big stuff in play, that's when this card is going to be useful. But yeah, I mean, like you can play this in the same turn as like a Libram of Hope, get 2 8/8s because it only costs 2. It seems like it is potentially like a powerful card in that style of deck. I don't think it's the sort of thing that I just like put into a random deck. It seems like if I have a deck that can generate a lot of stats for a like mid to low cost on a regular basis, that it does seem like it has the potential to be pretty powerful. So I have played a lot of pure Libram Paladin, and this definitely feels like a card that would have a home in there. There's actually a lot of cards in this set that feel like they could be pretty solid in that, and I'm pretty excited to explore how they can be used in that. And one of the big things about a lot of those decks is you're just making a big thing at a time. If it just kills your big thing, you're like, okay, well, now I have to make another big thing. If you obviously have a bunch of Librams, say you got like a Liadrin or whatever off, that makes it a lot different. But in the sort of like early mid stages, it's a lot harder to have like that much threat initially. So I think this is probably just like a pretty solid card in that style of deck, assuming again your deck is like pretty heavily invested in actually generating big guys itself. So it's not something that I would want to play like just kind of in reaction to opposing big stuff, though it can be effective there as well. Next up, we have Blessing of Authority. Give a minion +8/+8. It can't attack heroes this turn. This is, possibly a powerful card with Argent Braggart. You make a giant guy, can't attack heroes immediately, but you can still, boom, Braggart. Now it copies all those stats as well. But yeah, I mean, this doesn't really feel great to me. Like a huge buff like this, obviously, like in against opponents who are unable to actually kill the minion. Like, say you're playing against like Druid, right? Druid that like it typically can't really deal with a really big minion very well, and you're like, okay, like a Blessing of Authority, a guy on turn 4, and then it's like it's not like they're going to kill at turn 5. It got +8/+8, right? But that's pretty narrow. That's like a lot of matchups. You're gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna buff my guy. Like you can maybe use it on a taunt too. That's but again, like in a world of like silences and things like that, like especially with like Demon Hunter just getting the Mage Hunter, additional silence card, it feels like it's just not likely to find that much of a home because 5's pretty expensive, right? And 5 mana to buff something so that it can like trade or like be big for next turn seems like it's not likely to be very effective. But on like a taunt, on like a lifesteal thing, something you're getting additional value out of other than just like hitting something really hard, that's where I think it might be able to find a home. Next up, we have Ceremonial Maul. It's a 3-cost weapon with Spell Burst. Summon a student with taunt and stats equal to the spell's cost. So this was a card when I first heard of it was before I realized that Spell Burst was once ever. I thought it was once a turn. And I was like, this card is outrageous. I was just like, you could just keep casting spells and keep getting guys, and like they have to have weapon removal to get rid of it. But it's not that. It is summon one student with taunt and stats equal to the spell's cost. But yeah, I think this is potentially quite strong. A 3-cost 2/2 weapon obviously isn't like amazing, but it can, you can help take down mid-sized minions with it. You can kill like lackeys or whatever. You can just go to your opponent's face, whatever. But more importantly, of course, the spell burst ability in, say, like a Paladin deck, which is what we're talking about now, because it is a Paladin warrior weapon. Using this with like Libram of Hope can give you just multiple giant minions at the same time. Using it with just like Blessing of Kings can be quite strong. It is a little bit awkward in like if you are playing it in like Libram Paladin, right? Because you do have a bunch of like really cheap spells that you might find yourself in an awkward position where you want to play them all to use the weapon part, but you don't want to play it because you want to like wait until you have something big to play. But yeah, I mean, you can just play this. You can just play this in like dual Paladin, right? You can play this and then you just duel on 5, get your thing that you're dueling out, and get a 5/5 with taunt. Another way to get additional board presence out of a deck that is really light on minions. And there's a number of cards in this set that I think are actually pretty powerful for dual Paladin as well. So I think this is actually a pretty powerful card that I do expect to see experimented with in a number of ways. I know that I will be, and I definitely think it's pretty sweet. Speaking of dual Paladin, here's another dual Paladin style card, Commencement. 7-cost card, summon a minion from your deck, give it Taunt and Divine Shield. So one of the big problems, of course, if you are playing some like dual Paladin is, well, you got 2 duels in your deck. And if you don't duel, well, you're just waiting to play big things. Having redundancy, even if it's potentially worse in the form of Commencement compared to duel, is really effective in that sort of deck. Play like big minion Paladin with duel and Commencement can give you 4 different ways that you can get your gigantic things into play. This one gives it Taunt and Divine Shield as well, rather than giving your opponent a guy and fighting them, having them fight each other. So I can very easily imagine a dual plus Commencement Paladin deck that just plays enormous things, like the Giant Taunt with Death Rattle, spawn another taunt, the Scrapyard Colossus. Like just a bunch of huge things. And yeah, I think this is actually like a pretty strong, I mean, it's not like an inherently a strong card, right? But I think that the existence of this helps enable there to be a critical mass of that kind of effect to build that kind of deck. So I'm definitely very interested in trying that. I loved dual Paladin. Dual Paladin is like it never was good, right? It's never been good, but part of the reason it's never been good really is because it hasn't had the appropriate tools to be able to do what it tries to do consistently. And frankly, getting a giant thing and giving it Taunt and Divine Shield helps that deck have more ways to even try to be able to compete with stuff like any kind of aggressive deck. So it probably still isn't that good, but I will definitely be trying it. And you can use this with Ceremonial Maul. You play Ceremonial Maul, you play Commencement, and now you get 2 minions with taunt. A 7/7 taunt from the Ceremonial Maul and whatever you get off of Commencement for a lot of powerful defense. So I definitely am going to be giving it a shot myself. Next up, we have Devout Pupil. A 6-cost Divine Shield Taunt, 4/5, basically a Sunwalker, but it costs 1 less for each spell you've cast on friendly characters this game. This is another card that I am excited to try out in like pure Paladin and pure Libram Paladin. Obviously, more Librams you cast, you can just like have very easily a 0-cost 4/5 Divine Shield Taunt in that style of deck. Libram plus Hand of Adal, whatever, all kinds of stuff. Important to note, much like Lady Liadrin, this says friendly characters, not friendly minions. So if you're playing anything targeting yourself, that counts as well. I just think this card is just super good. I think that this will see a lot of play. We're talking about the Paladin version right now, but I think Priest seems super good as well. Just a very strong defensive tool, and also as a Divine Shield minion itself, a very powerful offensive tool, because it's very difficult for your opponent to kill it if you're able to play it like relatively early in the game. Much harder for your opponent to kill it, and then much easier for it to wear buffs to go on the offense. So I think this card is just very good. Next up is First Day of School. 0-cost, add 2 random 1-cost minions to your hand. So when I first saw this card, I was like, wow, this seems like trash, right? This seems pretty bad. And then I thought about this a little bit more. I was like, 1-drops are generally pretty bad, of course, right? But I thought about this a little bit more, and I think there's a lot of places that this card could be interesting, right? It could be a card that you play in Dual Paladin. We were talking about Dual Paladin. It could be a card you play in Dual Paladin. Dual Paladin is, really needs to only play big minions, but this gives you the ability to actually do things on turn 1 in your deck that only plays big minions. And also, like, you could play this in Pure Paladin. One of the things that's been a problem for Pure Paladin historically has been that you have a lack of 1-drops. The move of Aldor Attendant to be a 1/3 was obviously a huge boon for that deck. But being able to play like effectively another 1-drop in that deck in the form of playing this, that is pretty powerful. It's also a 0-cost spell that's really powerful at potentially enabling spell burst, right? Like, if there's just a lot of things that this can possibly do. It kind of like, it's not a card that by itself you look at and you're just like, ooh, that's powerful. But like the context in which it exists with spell burst, with pure cards, with all this, I think give it a lot of possible homes that you wouldn't really necessarily consider initially. Like I said, first impression was like, oh, this card is garbage. And then the more I thought about it, the more I liked it, which is, kind of interesting. Anytime you see a 0-cost card, think again. 0-cost cards are something that you really need to evaluate in a different way than anything else. The fact that you can just play this in turn 1 and immediately play a 1-drop, obviously, like, you immediately play one of the things it gives you, it's good. This is like kind of like a Firefly, right? And Firefly was great. And if you're playing a like Libram buff style Paladin deck, having the multiple things you can possibly like play buffs on is very, very valuable. So I'm definitely gonna try this card, and I expect it to actually overperform compared to at least my initial evaluation. Next up, we have Gift of Luminance. 3-cost spell, give a minion Divine Shield, then summon a 1/1 copy of it. So this is especially interesting with Librams. The fact that you can play this on something that has Libram of Wisdom, and you get a 1/1 copy that also has the Libram of Wisdoms on it, is very, very powerful. Can work with Death Rattle stuff, can work with a lot of different things. So yeah, I think this is not necessarily a card that I'm just like want to just throw into a bunch of decks, but I would definitely play like a copy of this, right? At least. In a Libram Paladin deck, simply because you can be used to generate a bunch of extra Librams. The Divine Shield portion is obviously pretty strong to enable any kind of like trading. You can definitely get like strong value trades, well, not even trades, but strong value attacks into your opponent's stuff. Thanks to relatively cheap Divine Shield, and then of course getting the whatever sort of bonus. So yeah, I think this is a not necessarily like a superstar type card, but definitely has a lot of potential with variety of different strategies, especially Librams and some sort of Death Rattle stuff. If you're playing like Reborn deck, right? This is like very good. If say you're playing like Quest Paladin for some reason. This helps helps you summon additional Reborn minions, helps you get potentially advance that quest in a way that allows you to gain tempo on the board because you're getting the Divine Shield on the guy in play as well. So I think it's an interesting card, and I'm definitely gonna experiment with it as well. Don't necessarily think it's going to be like a superstar like some of these things, but definitely interesting. Next up, we have Goody Two Shields. I love this name. 3-cost 4/2 with Divine Shield, spell burst, gain Divine Shield. I think this card is just good. This card I think is just very, very solid. It's 4 power 3-drop with Divine Shield is like, that's like not easy to kill. This can be like, your opponent can like dagger backstab this or whatever, but like Demon Hunter Punch attack a guy into it. But overall, I just think this card is super solid, right? It's really good with buffs because, again, Divine Shield. Your opponent like breaks the Divine Shield. You play a spell to buff it. It gets Divine Shield and the buff. I just think this card is really, really, really solid. I expect this to be a staple card in like any kind of like aggressive Paladin deck, any kind of like mid-range Paladin deck, even like a control Paladin deck. I think this is just a really, really solid card. Right? I just think this is, just very, very good. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the most played Paladin card in the set, because I think it just has the ability to go into so many different decks. It's just good. It's just good. You gotta have some spells in your deck, but you're gonna have spells in your deck. You're playing Paladin. You're gonna at least have Hand of Adal in your deck. Let's be serious. Next up, we have High Abyss Allura. 4-cost 3/6 with spell burst. Cast a spell from your deck. Targets this if possible. I love this card. I think this card is super interesting. And a big part of that is that I think that it is something that obviously makes you think about how you design your deck. In Paladin, if you're going to play a Paladin deck, it's like, okay, well, do I play, X card if I'm going to play High Abyss Allura? You almost want to play exclusively things that are positive output. Obviously, we're talking mostly about Paladin now, but I do want to talk a little bit about like this as Paladin/Priest. This is probably not a card you play in like your average Priest deck, right? Because your average Priest deck has a lot of removal. And in your average Paladin deck, you're probably not going to play this in a Paladin deck that includes equality, right? Because you just like, aha, I will buff my High Abyss Allura. And then it's like, oh, well, I will cast equality. It's like, what a fool. That said, it's pretty fortunate this exists at the same time as Libram of Justice, which only affects your opponent's stuff. I really like the design of this in the sense that like, it is not only like a puzzle for like, okay, when do I want to trigger the spell burst? Like how do I want to use this? But also like, how do I build my deck in the first place? Like it makes you, really think about like, the sort of things that you want to make sure that you don't accidentally trigger that are negative for you. I think that like, in Paladin, most Paladin things are positive, right? Like you can play this in a Paladin deck and just play like, you know, your like Gift of Luminance, your Blessing of Kings, Hand of Adal, Librams. Every Libram is good. You know, there's no negative outcomes for like any of those sort of things. But you know, again, like you're probably not playing this in a deck with Equality. Equality is probably not a card you're playing these days because of the existence of Libram of Justice anyway. Even if you don't have anything that reduces the cost of your Librams, Libram of Justice is still generally better. But yeah, I think it's just like a super solid card, and I'm really excited to explore like the deck building challenges for it. I think the challenges are less in Paladin because Paladin's mostly just like, hey, buff my guys, hey, hit your stuff. But also, yeah, the raunchy animation video revealing this sort of showcased that. You don't want this in a deck with Plague of Death, I'll tell you that much. All right, next up we have Judicious Jr. This card is pretty interesting. 6 cost 4/9. Wouldn't really get your attention. It's like, what, you know, what's this? But Lifesteal? Lifesteal, I think, is actually great on this combination. I don't know that you're likely to want to put this into a constructed deck as it is, but 9 health on a Lifesteal minion makes it very difficult for your opponents to just like easily trade into it and get rid of it. And then, you know, this like plus buffs is obviously terrifying for any kind of aggressive deck. A lot of aggressive decks will kill you first, right? A lot of aggressive decks are going to kill you before you get a chance to attack back with this against, like, say, you know, Demon Hunter or like, you know, Hunter or whatever. And you're just spending 6 to play something that doesn't do anything immediately is just going to get deadly shotted by like actual Hunter these days. This is a card that you can actually just like put into your deck in like a dual deck and is good to get off your duel, right? A lot of times you have like dual, you know, dual decks that only play like really expensive stuff, but this like off of duel against an aggressive deck is gonna, you know, hit your opponent's thing, gain you life immediately, and that I think is interesting. I doubt you're gonna see much of this in a deck that is just looking to cast it for its full mana cost, right? You're probably not playing this in like pure Paladin or like buff Paladin or whatever. Maybe you're playing this in like control Paladin that has a bunch of board clears and stuff, and you're just like, aha, I have this as like, you know, kind of a card that can help like seal the game, get my life back, but probably not. But I do see this as like, you know, kind of the bridge card between your removal spells / dual type cards of like a dual commencement deck, and then your like really big top end stuff. So yeah, I think this is like, despite being a super simple looking card, something that has the possibility of finding a home. Next up is Lord Barov, the Warrior Paladin hybrid. 3/2 with Battle Cry, set the health of all other minions to 1, death rattle, deal 1 damage to all minions. I'm not really sure what to think about this card. This is a really interesting card. Obviously, it's like, if you can just like kill it yourself, you play it and kill it yourself, it kills everything, right? Because everything becomes 1, deals 1 damage to everything. It feels like this is better in Warrior because Warrior has more ways to like whirlwind, but at the same time, it's like, this can just be like, you're playing like aggro token Paladin, and this is just like an equality that's still a body, right? Like you don't have to just play an equality in your deck because equality itself is like just really bad and really expensive. Whereas this is like, okay, you know, I'm playing it. It's like, play this out, send in, you know, my like little dudes to kill your big dudes, and I still have a body in play. And that's actually pretty relevant, right? This is like probably not a card you're playing in like control Paladin because like there are just better options. But maybe you're playing, you know, you're playing this instead of equality because it's just like, well, I might as well just play this. But yeah, I mean, you can obviously play this plus like, you know, anything that kills it, anything that damages their opponent's minions. Obviously, the death rattle makes it kind of weird if you are playing like aggro token type Paladin. It's like, okay, well, you send it in, then you make more token things like, okay, well, kill that guy and kill the rest of your stuff. It's obviously just like, it's better than equality is, right? Because you get, you know, you're equalitying and then still getting a body, but it's not actually strictly better because like, again, you have a thing that has death rattle, deal 1 to everything. So if you're trying to equality and then play a bunch of small things, it's like, well, now I kill your Lord Baroff and your small things are dead. Maybe you just, you know, this is just like a card that you put in control as an extra equality because one of the you know, big things if you're trying to play control Paladin is like, well, I didn't draw equality, I lost. It doesn't work with Pyromancer, right? You can't Barov Pyromancer. You can Barov Pyromancer spell, but like Barov Pyromancer, unlike Barov Equality, doesn't actually clear the board. So kind of interesting. But yeah, I think this is, you know, definitely a powerful card for either combination, you know, either side of this. And I'm curious how to sort of explore the best ways to use it. Next up, we have Shield of Honor. 1 cost spell, give a damage minion +3 attack and Divine Shield. This feels like, you know, similar to well, not similar to Barov, because I was talking about how, like, you know, the tokens are so good with that. I feel like this is probably better in a Warrior deck because it's pretty difficult to damage, you know, get your own guys damaged in Paladin. Actually get +3 attack. Most of the stuff you typically have in Paladin is like small things that like are unlikely to survive being damaged a lot of the time. It feels like it can be a pretty powerful card in Paladin. or rather in warrior, but we're talking about paladin right now, and it's like, okay, well, you don't really have great ways to damage your own guys. A lot of your things are like going to be silver hand recruits and stuff. If you do end up just like, being in a sort of normal, minion combat where you have like a buffed guy, maybe this is like just good in like pure paladin / like Libram type paladin, right? Because you just like have like a medium-sized guy and you're like, okay, send my medium-sized buffed guy in and then play this on him, and it's much harder for your opponent to remove it. But it is like, a pretty significant additional expenditure of resources in that style of deck. It is an interesting card for sure, but not sure how to use it in paladin. ? Very easy to use in warrior, which we'll talk about when we get to it, but seems tougher to use in paladin. Next up we have Turalyon, the Tenured. 8 cost 3/12 with rush. Whenever this attacks a minion, set the defender's attack and health to 3. So basically, attack, kill your guy, and have a 3/9 left over, and can keep doing this. This seems medium powerful. It's obviously really good at killing individual things. It's no Tarim. Like, Tarim was unbelievably powerful. This is much worse than Tarim, but it's also, it immediately kills something. If your opponent has like a utility type minion, you can play this and kill it. Very good in dual paladin, right? Like this gets, comes off your duel, and then it's like, okay, well now this, goes and attacks and kills everything. 12 is a lot of health, right? This is going to kill something and still have 9 health left. So this can kill 4 things straight up. So I think it's just a solid card. I don't think this is like, some sort of like crazy all-star, but I think this is just a powerful card overall. 8's a lot of mana, but again, this is, really powerful off of like duel or commencement. We've been talking about like playing like big dude paladin with those types of cards. And this, I think, is a pretty obvious inclusion in that. I don't know necessarily where else it goes. This is also just like, if your opponent has like a big taunt, it's like, okay, rush, kill it. Anything, rush, kill it. I think this is just like a like solid topper of a proactive deck. It's not really a great defensive tool unless you're playing as like a mid-range deck with just big guys, but can get you through any kind of taunt by itself, can like kill any kind of big thing by itself. Really depends what the metagame looks like as to whether this is something that you're really interested in having, like, in a lot of different decks. If there's a lot of big things, a lot of big minion type decks, this is like an incredible card, right? Because it's just going to kill their big thing and then stay around to kill their additional big things. But, if you're in a like aggressive metagame, this card is just like slow and bad. So we shall see. Lastly, for Paladin, we have Wave of Apathy. 1 cost spell, set the attack of all enemy minions to 1 into your next turn. I don't feel like there's that many great ways to use this in Paladin. I mean, if you're playing this is, I guess, kind of like Turalyon. If you're in a mid-range metagame and you're playing a mid-range minion deck, this is a reasonable way to, like, you cast your Wave of Apathy and attack all your guys into their guys, and you get, like, good incredible trades off or whatever. It is also good at, like, if your opponent has just like big dudes, you just Wave of Apathy them, and now they can't attack you back. It's not just on your turn, right? This is until your next turn. I think this is a very conditional card, right? This is like, if the metagame is something that has like a lot of big dudes, this is a good card. If there are not, if there are a bunch of small dudes, this is a bad card. And again, it's like not even like, is it a good card? Is it reasonably playable? This, much like the Shield of Honor, I think is probably better in the other class. Like this, obviously works super well with like Cabal and the new Cabal or whatever in Priest. But I feel like it's a lot more difficult to find a way to use this in Paladin. Next up, we have Rogue. Our first card is Brain Freeze. We talked about this during Mage, and I think this is better as a Rogue card, as I was talking about then. Freeze a minion combo, also deal 3 damage to it. Rogue, typically has lots of cheap stuff, uses combo really well. This being essentially 1 mana, 3 damage to your opponent's thing is quite powerful, right? Whether it's, your backstab, comboing, killing something, and having the utility to freeze a big minion can be quite powerful as well. So, again, much like I talked about during Mage, I don't think this is like any kind of like superstar type card, but in a metagame with, a lot of sort of cheap minions, a lot of things where the combo is going to kill them, this can be quite powerful. And with the even in a matchup where you run into big stuff, being able to freeze a big thing can give this some utility there as well. So again, don't know if it's going to be any kind of like superstar type card by any means, but definitely solid in the right matchups. Next up, we have Coerce. 3 cost, destroy a damaged minion combo, destroy any minion. So obviously, worse than Execute. If you play it up front, this is a Rogue Warrior card, of course. You can destroy a damaged minion, but being able to destroy any minion for 3 with combo is pretty good. Obviously, the it's not quite just straight up 3 mana, but being able to like backstab one thing, combo, boom, kill your big thing, really good. Very easy to combo in Rogue. Actually, very easy to combo in both Rogue and Warrior. We'll obviously talk about it in the Warrior section as well. But lackeys in particular make combo really easy these days. You have lots of ways to generate one-cost things. Frequently have like a bunch of them just sitting in your hand. So yeah, I mean, this is just a really powerful way to you know, kill any big thing. Is the metagame one that has, you know, significant numbers of big things? That's kind of the question of whether you end up playing Course. Do you end up playing Course? Are you playing, you know, if you're not playing Secrets, where you're playing like Stunner, you know, maybe you want to play Course. Probably don't want, you know, it's probably better than Sap in most situations, right? Sap is obviously more efficient, but your opponent can replay the thing, whereas with Course, it's gone forever, but you have to spend a little bit more and has to have combo. So overall, I think it's just a you know, really solid removal effect. As to whether it sees play, just sort of depends, you know, how many big things are in the metagame. Next up, we have Cutting Class. I like the double entendre here. It's like cutting class. Are you cutting class? No, this is a class where you cut things. Draw 2 cards, cost 1 less per attack of your weapon. So yeah, this is a probably not the best card in most like Rogue decks, because you don't really end up with a big weapon most of the time. But if you are playing, you know, deadly poison type things, can be like pretty good. But there aren't really that many like weapon Rogue decks right now, right? Most of the time, it's pretty much just like daggers, right? We're not really, obviously I think this is more of like a warrior card, because this is a Rogue warrior card. Could be played in like Quest Rogue. You get your quest online and then you can start drawing stuff. But the problem is that you want to be drawing things to get your quest online. You could use this with Waggle Pick. It's probably the best use, right? You Waggle Pick and then you spend 1 mana to draw 2, which is powerful. Maybe you're playing like Pirate Rogue in that way. Kind of ends up taking the place of more like a raiding party, which was obviously outrageously powerful, but before it got nerfed. Like either Waggle Pick or Hooked Scimitar, you know, could be a refill for that style of Rogue deck. We don't really see those right now, but maybe that's because they don't have enough ways to refill because they run out of resources, and maybe Cutting Class will help enable that. So could be good. You know, we don't really see that style of deck seeing that much play now, but maybe this will help them. Next up, we have Dr. Krastanov. 5 cost 4/4 with Rush. Whenever this attacks, give your weapon +1/+1. Well, this goes right into that Hooked Scimitar Waggle Pick deck to you know, get big weapons, swinging them around. I have seen people say that this is like just better than Hook Tusk, and in a lot of cases it is. It's not a pirate though, which is actually a pretty big deal because you can't get it off of Ankar and Warrior or anything like that. But it is obviously like really impactful. You just get the immediate attack and boom, buff your weapon as well. But yeah, I think this is not necessarily a card that you're gonna just see played in like normal Rogue. Oh, did I say Hook Tusk? I meant Greenskin. I've been playing too much Battlegrounds. Captain Hook Tusk, even though she's been nerfed. Captain Greenskin is what I meant. I think it's obviously just a really solid card if you are playing a deck that wants to get the weapon buff, because getting the weapon buff and having an efficient attacker with Rush can be quite powerful. You know, giving you the ability to push damage to face and clear your opponent's taunt minion in the same turn. It's obviously only a 4/4, so a lot of stuff that you're going to attack into isn't necessarily going to die to it. As far as like, you know, big taunts, whatever, we've seen like, you know, the Devout Pupil, the Sunwalker, that this would be bad against. And it's also worth noting that, you know, if your opponent does have like a big taunt that you want to attack through with your weapon, and, you know, say your opponent has a 4/5, whether it's like, you know, the Teacher's Pet or, you know, Devout Pupil or whatever, and you have a weapon that you could buff to 5 with a Captain Greenskin, you'd much rather have a Captain Greenskin than this guy. Even though, like, lots of situations, this is going to be better because it has the Rush as well. You know, in very particular situations, which I think can come up quite a bit given what we've seen, this is going to be worse in those situations at doing what you want. But overall, I think it's a very solid card if you are looking for weapon buffs, and as you've seen with Cutting Class, maybe there's a lot more support for that now. Next up, we have Infiltrator Lillian. 4 cost 4/2 stealth with Death Rattle, summon a 4/2 Forsaken Lillian that attacks a random enemy. This card seems very good in just an aggressive deck. You know, when this was revealed, a lot of people were saying that they thought it was bad. I think they were saying that it was like, oh, this is, you know, just not that good. This is like very good if you're trying to kill your opponent, right? Because it's a 4/2 stealth, gonna hit your opponent pretty hard, and they're like, okay, if they spend a removal spell on it, then you just get a 4/2 that attacks them in the face, and it's still there. I think it's just a very solid card for aggressive Rogue deck. And, you know, this alongside like the Hook Scimitar deck we're talking about with like Cutting Class, Krastanov, whatever, just gonna get damage in, right? It's certainly not a particularly like splashy fancy card, but it is a card that's gonna smart people for a lot. This is very frequently gonna just like be 4 mana, deal 8 to your opponent. Seems real good in an aggressive deck. Next up, we have Jandis Barov. We talked about this in the Mage section, but for Rogue Rogue is pretty interesting. Rogue has stuff like Rogue has lackeys, right? You can witchy lackey this itself. You can witchy lackey the secretly invisible one, secretly illusionary one. You can you can shadow step this, right? There's a lot of additional ways to take advantage of this. You can depending on what you get from the random minions, you can shadow step those. I think this feels much more impressive to me in Rogue than Mage for pretty much for a lot of those reasons. Rogue also typically tends to be a more proactive minion-based class than Mage does. Being able to force your opponent to deal with the sort of gamble of which one is the illusion, and risk that or else take a lot of damage is a really big deal. Obviously, again, the synergies with Witchy Lackey and Shadow Step are there in Rogue as well, and they are not in Mage. So I think this just seems like a really powerful tempo card for again, maybe that aggressive Rogue deck, right, that we're talking about. Even if you don't do anything fancy with this, forcing your opponent to awkwardly deal with 2 5-drops on turn 5 can be really difficult for them if you're playing any kind of aggressive strategy. So I think this is just a very solid aggressive tempo card for Rogue. Next up, we have Plagiarize. Secret: at the end of your opponent's turn, add copies of the cards they played to your hand. I assume this only triggers if they play any cards, and you don't just play your Plagiarize, and at the end of their turn, if they played no card, you get nothing. Maybe that's how it works, but I think this is an interesting card, right? There's the number of Rogue secrets that exist, make it so that it's not super easy to test for all of them, and this can be just kind of nutty, right? A lot of your opponent say playing any kind of aggressive deck, you have this, they play just a bunch of small dudes, and you're okay, well, granted you spent 2 mana playing Plagiarize, which doesn't really do anything, but then they're okay, I play 3 things. You're all right, this was a draw 3 cheap cards because you played 3 cheap cards. Obviously, this is something that can be very awkward in particular circumstances, but also has a really, really high ceiling. So I think this is really neat. I really like that it does exist. I think that it's probably not going to be that good, but it's definitely going to make games more complicated in terms of playing around the right secrets. It's also going to show up a lot more than you necessarily would actually just putting it into a deck because of Shadow Jeweler. And we're up to Potion of Illusion. We talked about this in Mage. In Rogue, obviously, the copying your combo cards, copying your battle cries. This works very well with combo because it gives you guys that cost 1. Potion of Illusion on your Jandis Barov, or your Infiltrator Lillian, any of these things that we've got over right now. Potion of Illusion just on a board of lackeys, right? You just end up getting a bunch of extra lackeys. You end up getting play this after you've played an Edwin and a bunch of lackeys. You're okay, well, let's try again. Boom, 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 boom. I think it's really a really neat card. I don't know that we're necessarily going to see this just played in that many Rogue decks, but I can definitely see this coming off of Ethereal Lackey and having a huge impact on games of attrition because you just, there's so many powerful battle cries. Being able to Potion of Illusion your Togwaggle, right? Potion of Illusion your Kronks. There's just so many things that, especially alongside Shadow Step, you can do pretty nutty things with. So again, I'm not really convinced this is going to find its way into the actual deck construction of many Rogue decks, but because of Ethereal Lackey, I think it's going to actually end up having a pretty big impact on a lot of attrition long games. Next up, we have Secret Passage. 1 cost, replace your hand with 5 cards from your deck, swap back next turn. When I first saw this, I was is this an adventure card? This card seems pretty bonkers. Because if you have an empty hand, this is 1 cost, draw 5. If you have a hand that doesn't really do anything, it's 1 cost, draw 5. It's obviously very akin to Memory Jar from Magic the Gathering, which was a card that got emergency banned because it was so outrageously powerful. That said, that existed in a environment with a ton of mana acceleration that allowed you to do pretty crazy things. And this is, a Rogue card. You can't play this with a bunch of mana ramp or anything like that. And there's less ridiculous, crazy combo type things that you can do. There are literally combo things you can do. But yeah, this is a way for a Rogue deck that kind of runs out of gas to just refuel massively. It is worth noting that if you Secret Passage into card draw, you're gonna swap your cards that you draw back into your deck. So, or if you generate lackeys or anything like that, you could only use this to play out a bunch of stuff on the board. You can't have things that carry over through your next turn, which is an interesting thing considering how much of Rogue's long-term advantage stuff right now does lie in like lackey generation, but it does feel like this is a card that you can just play like one of. It's kind of like a way to like refuel in like a tempo rogue style deck that can be like like a really interesting way to give yourself just like that big burst to sort of finish your opponent. It's like a really cheap Myra's Unstable Element, right? It doesn't fill your hand, but you just have like a single copy of this, maybe 2 copies of this in your deck, and you're just like, okay, well, play out all my stuff, Secret Passage, play all that stuff, go. But it's definitely not just like 1 cost draw 5, right? There's a ton of drawback to it in terms of how you have to use those cards that you get in order to really take advantage of them. So it does seem like it has a far more narrow home than most of the rogue decks that exist right now, but I could easily see this being a powerful card in the right deck. Next up, we have Self-Sharpening Sword. Well, we're talking about ways to enable cutting class, ways to use Dr. Krasnov. This is one of those. A 3-cost 1/4. After your hero attacks, gain +1 attack. So you want to play a rogue weapon deck. Here you go. Play this with Deadly Poison, and boom, cutting class. You get it down to 0 cost almost right away. So yeah, I think this is an interesting card. Like turn 1, you attack for 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4. Well, no, you don't. Do you ever attack for 4? You attack for 1, then you attack for 2, then you attack for 3. Yeah. Okay, never mind. So does a lot of damage, right? So does a lot of damage, and if you can increase the durability on this, it does a lot more damage, right? This goes extremely well with Dr. Krasnov or with Captain Greenskin. Uses a Deadly Poison really well because it has so much durability. So yeah, I mean, if you're in a environment that doesn't have that much weapon removal, this can be extremely powerful. That said, we do live in a world where Zephyrus exists, so every deck has, every Highlander deck has access to some amount of weapon removal. But even then, they don't really have to necessarily use that for just like your 3-cost weapon. And if you're loading it with a bunch of Deadly Poisons and stuff, then maybe. But yeah, I think this is a cool card, and this alone I think can help potentially enable that sort of weapon style deck that we're talking about. Next up, we have Shifty Sophomore. This is a stealth 4/4 with Spellburst, add a combo card to your hand. So I mean, 4-cost 4/4 stealth. Decent combination of cost, stats, and ability. There's a lot of stealth stuff in the format right now. Like the Sage, Greyheart Sage, plus the Poisoner dude, the 3/2 that gives a guy a stealth guy +2 and immune for the turn, and then Spellburst. So there's like kind of a bunch of value attached to this. And in Rogue, Spellburst is very easy to activate, right? Like you can Shifty Sophomore into just backstab, and you get a combo card. Again, a lot of these sort of rogue decks are looking for ways to generate additional value that isn't just that isn't just necessarily drawing cards. Like if you're not playing a lackey deck, which is the biggest way that rogues gain additional value right now, you don't necessarily have that many great ways to play like a longer game. A lot of these stealth decks kind of run out of resources pretty quickly, other than use of Greyheart Sage, and this is another way that you can gain a little bit of value. Obviously, you could end up with a combo card that isn't necessarily super valuable. You could end up with like Headcrack or something, but even just Headcrack, if you're playing like kind of an aggressive deck, can end up giving you a lot of value over the course of the game. So obviously Headcrack is only one example, but this could get you like a Coerce. They could get you a Brain Freeze. They could get you a lot of new stuff as well as a lot of other powerful things, just like Eviscerate to help end the game. Lots of stuff. So next up we have Steel Dancer. Speaking of our weapon deck, talk about a powerful card with that. 4-cost 4/4 with Battlecry. Summon a random minion with cost equal to your weapon's attack. So if you play the Self-Sharpening Sword, you Deadly Poison it. You play this. All of a sudden, you're playing a 4/4 and getting like a 4-drop or 5-drop alongside it. That is tempo. That's some powerful stuff right there. But yeah, I mean, I think that between this and the Krasnov and Cutting Class and the Sword, a lot of ways to help enable a weapon rogue deck. This also has crossover with Warrior. We'll talk about that when we get there. But a lot of power to an archetype that really didn't exist prior to this. So I'm definitely curious to explore that direction. And this is, I think, probably the biggest payoff card for that. Cutting Class, I think, is like kind of the sort of meat and potatoes, like, hey, let's help assemble all your synergy type stuff. And this is, one of the really big payoffs because, not really easy for a lot of classes to deal with, just 2 mid-sized minions at the same time on that early in the game. All the more stuff to support that kind of deck. Volpera Toxin Blade, 3-cost 3/3 with your weapon as +2 attack. Worth noting, Unlike pretty much every card we've seen prior to this that influences your weapon's attack, I guess there's what the Spiteful Smith is pretty similar to this, right? It's just like while enraged, your weapon has plus attack. This is just your weapon has plus 2 attack. So it's not a battle cry. You know, it's while this is in play, your weapon has plus 2 attack. And this is just kind of naturally powerful with your dagger. This doesn't even necessarily have to go into a weapon deck, right? This can just be like, you dagger up turn 2, you just play this turn 3, kill, hit your opponent for 3. It's just a deadly poison while it's in play, which is interesting. It is like kind of vulnerable. It is less reliable if your deck is planning on building around the plus attack. So this actually may be a card that's better outside of that like rogue weapon deck and just good in terms of enabling your dagger to be more powerful, but could even just go in both, right? Like if you're just really looking to load up on weapon bonuses, this, you can have this and your deadly poisons and everything. And it also is, it's just a 3-cost 3/3. It's not like amazing stats, but it's fine and can, help you push damage as well as, just soak up removal when you play it down and your opponent has to deal with it, or you just keep hitting them for more. And last but not least, we have Wand Thief. I talked about this in the Mage section. I do feel like this is quite likely to be better in Rogue than it is in Mage, because Rogue is much better equipped to enable combo than most Mage decks are. Obviously, possibly pretty good in any kind of Burgle Rogue deck that cares about having cards from outside your class. Can help easily enable your quest if you are playing Quest Rogue. I do think that like Quest Rogue still lacks any kind of really meaningful big payoff. There's no more tests. You don't really have great ways to really care about the fact that you use you get your weapon online to survive that long, and you don't really have great survivability still. There aren't really cards in this set outside of this that help support that archetype. So I'm a little bit skeptical of how effective that kind of deck could be. But obviously this is a card that I would play in a Quest Rogue deck, but I still don't think there's enough tools there. So we're kind of gonna keep an eye out for more in the future. Maybe I'll mess around with it, but I still feel like the biggest problem that deck has is it doesn't really have anything that it really builds to compared to other strategies. Next up, we have Priest. And our first card is Brittle Bone Destroyer. 4-cost 3/3 with Battle Cry. If your hero's health changed this turn, destroy a minion. This card, I think, is obviously very powerful if you can enable the Battle Cry, right? If you can enable your hero's health change this turn, destroy a minion, just 4-cost 3/3, kill a minion, super strong. I think that this is a harder thing to get enabled in Priest than it is in Warlock, because your opponent has to play into it, right? They have to be attacking you, and you have to be able to heal yourself. This is extremely effective alongside Lifesteal, things that can enable it for 0 mana, or things that can enable it for really cheap. I was more skeptical of this card in Priest in particular until the final reveals when we saw Raise Dead. Raise Dead is a 0-cost card that damages you, has a couple of effects. One, can obviously enable this by itself because it changes your hero's life. And 2, being able to self-damage naturally with Raise Dead enables you to heal yourself. So even if you don't play the Raise Dead the turn that you use this, it enables you to be able to heal yourself and then use this anyway. So I think this is just a very, very strong card. And I think that even if it is likely more powerful in Warlock than it is in Priest, I think that it is also very, very strong in Priest as well, especially with Raise Dead, right? One of the big things about Raise Dead, which we'll get to later, is that it is a sort of pseudo resurrection effect that puts the cards in your hand, which is extremely effective not only at enabling Brittlebone Destroyer, but with Brittlebone Destroyer. It can allow you to get back your Brittlebone Destroyers and kill more things later on. So I think this card is really, really good. And I do expect it to see quite a bit of play. More on that line, Cabal Acolyte. 4-cost 2/6 taunt with Spellburst. Gain control of a random enemy minion with 2 or less attack. So a lot of ways to enable caballing effects to control your opponent's stuff. Obviously, even just as a 4-cost 2/6 taunt, this isn't bad, right? Like that's a stat line that we've seen play before, and can absorb quite a bit of damage. You don't necessarily have to play this the same turn you spellburst it, but you can very easily alongside Wave of Apathy, which we just talked about in Paladin. Obviously, very powerful with this. To just steal your opponent's thing right away. But yeah, I think this card is really, really solid, and the sort of steal your opponent's stuff has a lot more support. Being able to use something like Wave of Apathy or Lazul Scheme or whatever with both this and the original Cabal Shadow Priest, gives you a lot more sort of value from having those effects in your deck to begin with. You know, just having Cabal Shadow Priest, you know, as an excuse to play like say Lazul's Scheme or Wave of Apathy is not quite enough. But having 4 ways to take advantage of them to steal your opponent's things, I think is actually really strong. Obviously, this is a random minion, so it's not quite as powerful as a Cabal Shadow Priest would be on you know, a board with a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of ways to sort of narrow that down to ensure that you're getting something good. So I think this card is quite strong, and I expect to see a significant amount of play. Next up, Devout Pupil. We talked about this during the Paladin section, but also a strong Priest card as well. This, I think, in particular, you know, makes me more excited to play Renew, which is already a card that I want to play in a lot of Priest decks. Just effectively a free way to get a discount from my Devout Pupil. You just renew yourself, discover a new spell, maybe you discover another renew. You're just like continuously reducing the cost of your Devout Pupils. This is friendly characters, so you can't like be like Shadow Word painting your opponent's stuff and discounting it. Works very well with the Sethic Veil Weaver, which is another card that wants you to just like be playing spells. So this plus Veil Weaver plus like High Abyss kind of makes me wonder if there's like a like buff priest style of deck that we want to be building here that, you know, ends up wanting to play more stuff on your own cards rather than necessarily playing like more of the traditional sort of control priest of playing a bunch of removal spells. Maybe we're playing more of a proactive buff style of priest deck with stuff like this and like the, you know, lifesteal spell, things like that. So I definitely think there's a lot of tools that look to go in that direction that I'm pretty excited about. Next up is Disciplinarian Gandling. This is my reveal card, and yeah, this card's real good. I think this is much like the Brittle Bit Destroyer. I feel like this is probably stronger in Warlock. Far more ways to both get and take advantage of small minions killing themselves in Warlock than in Priest. But even in Priest, you know, I think that you know, if you're playing a Priest deck with a lot of like cheap stuff like Disciple of Galakron, right? There's a lot of ways to take advantage of this. You know, if Disciple of Galakron is getting you like kind of small garbage things, it's like, well, you just play those and you get 4/4s. You can just play this with like Wisp, right? You can play this with like just, you know, super cheap things. Obviously, not nearly as effective in Priest because you don't have the card draw of Life Tap that you have access to in Warlock, but still just quite powerful. I think that this is, maybe you're playing, you play this in like a deck with just like a bunch of cheap dudes and buffs, and then have this, and it's like, okay, well now you have your cheap dudes, and, you know, maybe this is going in that same deck we were talking about. You just have your cheap dudes and that you're playing in order to buff, and now you don't necessarily have to buff them because you just play a Disciplinarian Gandling and just throw out your little dudes, and suddenly they're 4/4s for like 1 mana or whatever. I think that it is, you know, again, I think this is probably a more powerful card in Warlock, but has a lot of potential in Priest as well. Next up, we have Draconic Studies. This was my major in college. Discover a dragon. Your next costs 1 less. So again, talk about the studies effects quite a bit. Getting a discount effect on dragons, obviously, just like, you know, a ramp effect in Priest effectively is pretty unusual. Priest rarely gets a chance to do this sort of thing. And frankly, Priest is very effective if it gets ahead on board with big minions against the opponent, because then your hero power becomes very good at controlling the board by healing your minions. So, you know, this I think is actually potentially very, very strong in Priest, simply because, you know, being able to even just ramp out like a, you know, 4-cost dragon on turn 3 can be a really big deal, right? Like getting out a, even just like, you know, a 3/6 on turn 3, right? Is a way bigger deal for a Priest than any other class, because you can heal it. You know, like the basic way to deal with a big minion, outside of obviously direct removal, is, you know, grind it down over a couple of turns with like, you know, minions attacking into it. Like, you know, that's how you deal with big stuff in a lot of classes, and that's not really realistic against a Priest, because they can just heal it either with their hero power or with spells as well. So I think this is real strong. I mean, you can even just like, you know, say you play like one of these in turn 1, you play another one in turn 2, turn 3 you just play a 5-drop. You know, you can play an early Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, you can play an early Ysera, you can play any of these really big effective things really early, and that is very powerful. So I think this card is very, very good, and I think that like a tempo Dragon Priest may get like a really big boost from this card. Next up, we have Flesh Giant. Costs 1 less for each time your hero's health changed during your turns. This is how you like punish people for beating you down and, you know, just healing yourself. Obviously, this does require you to be able to take damage, be able to heal yourself, much like The other cards that we talked about, the Brittlebone Destroyer, this might be a little bit harder to use in Priest than in Warlock because of that. But again, I talked about how my sort of valuation of a lot of these things is very different with Raise Dead, because the ability to use Raise Dead to proactively reduce your health total, which triggers your Flesh Giant, which you can then heal yourself to reduce the cost of your Flesh Giant again, is a really big deal. So I think that this is very likely a pretty powerful card with the right sort of combination of effects. I think this is really interesting. Obviously, you want to play this in something that can this with, say, like Raise Dead, right? Not only are you getting Raise Dead to enable your Flesh Giant, of course you have to have other early things to allow you to use Raise Dead effectively. But then, like, sort of in the late game, you might just Raise Dead your Flesh Giants and get even more like 1, 2, 0 cost 8/8s in play. So pretty powerful, I think. Next up, we have Frazzled Freshman. This is obviously a very simple card, but a 1 cost 1/4 is the hardest to kill 1-drop we're realistically going to see, and with no drawback. There's the Soul Tongue thing, which, by the way, can work very well with Flesh Giant. But this, if say we're playing that proactive buff deck, right? You play, like this into whatever sort of buff effects. Like there's the Power Word Feast, which we'll get to in a bit. Being able to play like just a difficult for your opponent to kill minion into buff effect. Like this would just it's very difficult for your opponent to remove it easily. And then you have the threat of like Apotheosis or, whatever other sorts of buffs. Really, really, difficult for opponents to deal with. This into Power Word Feast, really, really difficult for your opponent to deal with. And that I think is a very, very powerful ability to have like a sort of curve buff priest as opposed to like removal based priest. So I think it's very, very good. I think this is, again, like really, really like simple card, but definitely very powerful. Yeah. Frazzled Freshman into Power Word Feast, the Freshman 15. You just Frazzled Freshman turn 1, Power Word Feast, then attack him for 15. That's what you call the Freshman 15. Next up, we have Gift of Luminance, another possible, buff priest style card. I think this card, we talked about it a bit in Paladin. I think it's quite strong in priest as well. You can use this on things with utility effects. You can play this on a Cabal Acolyte, trigger Cabal Acolyte, have another Cabal Acolyte that can still trigger its ability. Quite powerful, I think. Divine Shield is one of the things that Priest doesn't naturally have access to. So having this sort of hybrid card with Paladin gives you the ability to trade up with your minions that you're buffing, which can be a very big deal. Divine Shielding your Lifesteal guy from Apotheosis can be very, very powerful. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting card. Obviously with Death Rattles, Priest has a lot of powerful Death Rattles historically, and being able to make a 1/1 version of your Death Rattle minion that has Divine Shield. So all sorts of stuff you can do with this that can be quite strong, I think. Overall, I just think this is a very solid card. Lots of utility with it, both in terms of the general sort of buff priest deck we've been talking about, as well as potentially with Death Rattles. Next up, we have High Abyss Allura. We talked about this a bit with Paladin. Now we'll talk about with Priest. I did mention that it's almost straightforward with Paladin, because Paladin has a lot of easy ways to use this. Pretty much all of your cards want to target your own things generally, or are just gonna do negative things to your opponent regardless without a target. This is a card that I think is much more of a deck building challenge in a priest deck. You're going to really want this in a priest like buff deck. Imagine playing this with Gift of Luminance, right? You high Abyss Allura, Gift of Luminance it. Now you have a new, you trigger whatever. You get another Allura who's going to trigger whatever, and you just keep going. You got a chain going on. Very, very powerful stuff that you can do. But it's obviously you're not going to be playing High Abyss Allura in a deck that has like Plague of Death, like in the Raunchy video, or like Shadowward Pain, or like Time Rip, or whatever. It's definitely very much a card that restricts your deck building from including many of the traditionally powerful cards that you would generally include in a lot of Priest decks. So you have to be a very proactive version of Priest with mostly spells that are intended to target your own guys. And that, I think, is just kind of an interesting direction to take Priest. We've seen lots of things in this set already that kind of go in that direction, and this is obviously one that really pushes you in that direction to not include the other stuff. Next up, we have Initiation. Deal 4 damage to a minion. If that kills it, summon a new copy. Probably not going into your High Abyss deck, but it is kind of funny comparing this to, what was it, Holy Water. Holy Water was 5 cost, deal 4 damage to a minion. If you kill it, put a copy in your hand. This is, if you kill it, get a new one in play. 1 more mana, put it right into play. Holier Water right here. This is, I I think this card is pretty mediocre, frankly. 6 cost deal 4 is not gonna 6 cost deal 4 situationally get something better out of it. Pretty medium, I think, but definitely has its potentially powerful moments situationally. In the right like metagame, if there's a lot of like very high value minions this can kill, if there's like death rattles, this is really good at stealing and things like that. But overall, I think this is not really as much of a standout card as some of the other ones we've been looking at. I don't really expect this to be like a staple card like most of the rest of the things that we've been talking about. Next up, we have Mind Render Illusia. So this is probably one of my favorite cards in the set, and not just necessarily because of it itself, but because of what it represents. I have really, for a very long time, wished that Priest, specifically Priest, had ways to interact with opposing combo style decks. And this is a way you can do that. Like this, if you're playing a Priest deck, if you're playing any Priest deck, just the threat of Mind Render Illusia can really force your opponent to play in weird ways. You can play this early and just like steal some cheap things from your opponent when you have an expensive hand yourself. You can hold this late and your opponent's like, say your opponent's playing a Malagos deck or whatever, and it's like, you play it and you're just like, oh, okay, I'll fire off all your Moonfires at you. You'll just like play a bunch of their like cheap things that they're relying on for their combo. So I think this is a like really interesting card. You can't just like play it though, right? Like you have to find the right time because you're swapping hands and decks with your opponent. If you just play this kind of randomly, it's like, okay, well now they use all your stuff against you. This can be really powerful in like just an aggressive deck, an aggressive Priest deck. You just like swap hands when you use your entire hand. It can be a card that gives you outs against combo as a controlling deck because you just hold it in your hand until your opponent has assembled a bunch of stuff, and you can try to like use that to like break up their combo. It's a card that's I think going to be both is like really interesting in terms of just like what it represents to me for like the design philosophy, because we've so rarely had cards that allow you to mess with your opponent this directly, right? To really screw up what they're trying to do. And I feel like that's something that has made Priest specifically, because it has like so frequently been like a very reactive class, so you can't just like play to kill your opponent like before they can get their combo off and stuff like that. It makes it very difficult to ever win a lot of those matchups, to have any hope. And this, I think, if used intelligently, can give you the ability to disrupt particular types of combos, but isn't just like, okay, I play it and I beat you because I have this card, and it just totally ruins you, right? You have to play it at the right time. You have to be able to to like figure out like the pace of the game and like when your opponent's combo will go off and things like that. And I just think this card is super interesting. I love it. I'm super stoked for the mere existence of this card and what it represents, and I'm really looking forward to figuring out how to play with it. Next up, we have Power Word Feast. 2-cost buff spell. Give a minion +2/+2. Restore it to full health at the end of this turn. Years ago, I said that I wished Priest just had Mark of the Wild, because Priest can use Mark of the Wild so much better than Druid can. Druid doesn't care about Mark of the Wild, right? At all. Priest like really struggles to use its early minions to do much of anything without like buffs. Priest like until like there was like Velen's Chosen was super strong Priest buff, right? And then other than that, it was like, okay, well, then there was like Divine Spirit, Inner Fire stuff or whatever. But if you want to play a proactive Priest deck, you still have to like play like removal spells all the time, which like we didn't line up well and everything. And this, I think this card is so good. Power Word Feast. This is +2/+2, which is like in the same set as Frazzled Freshman, seems super strong. This is like the card that Northshire Cleric had to die for, right? This couldn't exist in the same world as Northshire Cleric. It would be unbelievably powerful. But yeah, this plus Frazzled Freshman, the Freshman 15 right there, that is just like incredibly powerful against any kind of aggressive deck. You play your 1/4, it's so hard for them to kill it. You give it +2/+2, you kill their like biggest thing. It heals itself to full immediately. So good, right? So good. Yeah, this is like very much like the Morearms when it was briefly buffed before it was nerfed back. Yeah, I just think this card is great. I think this card helps promote a style of Priest play that like we haven't seen that much of, other than the brief period of the Morearms world. But even then, that was at the same time as Divine Spirit Inner Fire, and most of those decks just happened to have Morearms because it was like the best thing you could do early, and then also just ended up mostly killing you with Divine Spirit Inner Fire. So this, without Divine Spirit Inner Fire being a thing, without Northshire Cleric being a thing, which is like a much more honest, like, okay, I'm playing a proactive strategy with my Priest deck, trying to like get my stuff on the board, protect it and win that way. I think that's both a really interesting style that we haven't seen that much of in Priest, and also a style that uses their hero power better than kind of any other style that we really have had a chance to see. and I'm really excited to explore it because that's the kind of priest deck that I want to be able to be good. Next up, we have Raise Dead. I've alluded to this quite a few times. 0 cost spell. I've talked about this a lot. 0 cost. You gotta look at anything that costs 0 with like very, very careful vision, because anything that costs 0, it really takes, you need another look. Deal 3 damage to your hero. Return 2 friendly minions that died this game to your hand. So much like I talked about with the Brittlebone Destroyer, this is kind of like a res thing, but it's not a res thing that only wants you to have very specific types of cards in your deck, right? Like a lot of priest res stuff, you're putting it directly into play. You only want to play big stuff because you always want to bring back the big stuff. This is great with battle cries, right? This is very high value way to use stuff like the Brittlebone Destroyer. Not only because it helps enable the Brittlebone Destroyer by changing your life total, but also it can get back the Brittlebone Destroyer, kill more things. Like this isn't like a 0 cost thing. You can just play turn 1 though, because obviously stuff has to have died. But you want to play enough minions that you're like able to use them to trade early. This gives you like that much more value from stuff like Loot Hoarder or even just Frazzled Freshman, right? That die is probably not super excited to bring it back mid game, because a lot of the value of that is just in its initial stats per cost. But use this with like Cabal Acolyte, use this with Cabal Shadow Priest, use this with all sorts of things. Use this with Flesh Giant, Brittlebone Destroyer. It's just really, really powerful, I think. And yeah, the fact that it uses your life total as a resource in a class that wants to be able to use its life total as a resource because it can heal itself is, I think, a really valuable thing, especially because of if your life total change type cards. So I think it's a really, really good card. 0 cost way to enable Spell Burst, like just lots of stuff this does that I'm excited about. So obviously isn't just like a put 2 in any deck type of card, but can do just a whole lot. Can have a ton of utility. You can play this in like Highlander Priest, right? Be able to get back a lot of your powerful battle cries like Zephyrus or Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, right? It can be so good. You're probably just playing only really high quality minions, right? And getting 2 of them for 0 mana is a pretty big deal. So I think this is just really, really good, and I expect to see quite a bit of play. Last but not least, we have Wave of Apathy. I talked about how this kind of gave me a Wave of Apathy in Paladin and didn't really seem that good. In Priest, it's a different story. In Priest, set the attack of all enemy minions to 1. That enables Cabal Acolyte, enables Cabal Shadow Priest. It enables Shadow Word Pain. It enables Shadow Madness. This turns on a whole bunch of things for Priest in a way that it does not for Paladin. So I feel like this is, it's of course like a situational combo style card, but it is, something that can be very powerful in the right circumstances. Specifically, if you're playing, with both Cabal Acolyte and Cabal Shadow Priest, this, enables both of them to steal your opponent's stuff. Obviously, with Cabal Acolyte, it's random, but with Cabal Shadow Priest, it's like, boom. Back in the day, you used to play Shrinkmeister just because of its combo, pretty much, with Cabal Shadow Priest. And this is Shrinkmeister all your guys, all the way to 1. And that's really good. I don't know if like, that style of deck is good enough these days, right? Things are pretty fast, things are pretty powerful. But being able to like Wave of Apathy with so many things that allow you to steal your opponent's stuff, like one of the things that's really powerful right now, right, is like stuff like the warrior decks, the Inner Rage, like Copy Your Guy, Serpent Egg / Bomb Wrangler decks. If you just like Wave of Apathy, steal their Bomb Wrangler, steal their Serpent Egg, Shadow Madness this into this, whatever. It's like, that's all really good. And interestingly, it actually sets it to 1 and not 0, which is really important for Shadow Madness specifically, because if it was 0, you couldn't Shadow Madness and attack with their guy. But at 1, you could always attack with it with Shadow Madness, which is really, really valuable. I think this is just a, solid card. Obviously works well in Wild. You used to have, Pint-Sized Potion, Shadow Word Horror. Now you have Wave of Apathy, Shadow Word Horror. Kills everything, doesn't matter how big they are. Yeah, cool card. Again, don't know like if that style of deck is going to be good enough in today's world, but definitely worth exploring. And